Hello, everybody. Welcome to Patriot Plus. As you know, we've had some issues with locals. I'm still trying to figure all this out. I'll get it, but it'll take a while. This isn't my main thing, so I'm not a Joe Rogan or a Ben Shapiro or whoever they are. Anyway, welcome to Patriot Plus. A lot to discuss today. News, of course, has just broken here that, oh no, there's not going to be an arrest or an indictment today from this grand jury after they heard from Costello yesterday. And kind of the inside scuttlebutt is that he gave a very effective presentation. I was listening to Barnes last night, and his assessment is that this all comes down to whether or not any so-called hush money paid to Porny Daniels by Cohen was an illegal campaign contribution. And the problem is, if Cohen paid it, it ain't Trump, and they can't get Trump. If Trump paid it, his name's on the check, you can write a campaign contribution to yourself anytime, anywhere. And that ain't a crime. So they're wrestling with this problem. There's no there there. There's no crime there, no matter which way they come at it. But I'm sure that's not going to stop Democrats. They do this stuff all the time. They find crimes where there are no crimes, as with all the guys at Patriot Day. We've got to be careful now. We're on YouTube, so we have to make sure we watch what we say, because the little YouTubers get really upset if you say the wrong things. So it looks like this is going to be delayed until next week. I won't be totally surprised if they delay it ad infinitum to the point that nothing ever happens. And there have been a couple of columns that came out today that suggest that the Democrats really like this. Oh, they like that Trump is kind of on edge and that the Republicans are being forced to back Trump. They see this as a bonus. Now, I'm sure they do. I mean, I'm sure there's Democrat talking heads out there and insiders and advisors who do think this is a winner for them. Let me remind you of that show that was on HBO called The Circus back in 2016, and how they followed Hillary's advisors around, and how they all also thought Trump would be the easiest one to beat, and they were all gleeful that Trump was winning the nomination until he beat Kankles. Just because the Democrat advisors say it doesn't mean it's valid at all. It only means that's what they think, and that they think Rutabaga, my code name for a certain president, can beat Trump again. I don't think so, but there may be other ways to defeat a certain Trump, as they've used before. We'll see. But for right now, I won't be surprised if this is extended out forever and they never really get around to indicting Trump, thinking, again, their strategy here is to force the Republicans to coalesce around Trump. So it's kind of interesting. The Democrats want the Republicans supporting Trump. The rhinos and the GOP establishment want everybody to coalesce around DeSantis. Because it's what, I think Barnes is absolutely right on this, that the Democrats as a party fear DeSantis, but the deep state fears Trump. And I think that's totally right. Now, again, it doesn't mean because they fear DeSantis, the Democrats fear DeSantis as an electoral possibility, that he really is a bigger threat. It just means that maybe they're mistaken. I don't know. But there are these stories. I wanted to make sure you're up to date. There are these stories circulating out there that that in fact the Democrats are hoping to keep this circus in New York City going. So that's kind of the first thing to deal with there. Now, on his webcast last night, Barnes did a superb job of discussing DeSantis as a candidate, went into his background, that he had served both at Quantico and at Fallujah, which is not all that reassuring. Um, and Barnes portrays DeSantis as a pragmatist. That is, that he is focused on what will get him elected, and not as an ideologue. That is, not either a MAGA guy or an anti-MAGA guy. Doesn't matter. That he does have a few core things that he seems to be passionate about, including the CRT and the education stuff, some of the Disney stuff. But Barnes also pointed out that these were very popular positions in Florida. So it's not like he's exactly taking this courageous stand against Disney. He's doing what the public down there likes and supports and encourages. And I think that's a pretty good assessment of DeSantis. I think he has some neocon tendencies based on his votes in Congress and what he had said up until just a few days ago regarding Ukraine. Remember, a few days ago he came out with a statement that, you know, we need to quit sending money to Ukraine. But up until that point, he had pretty much supported the war in Ukraine. And my position is you will lose 25, 30% of the MAGA base if you support the war. One of Trump's 2016 appealing qualities was that he said no more foreign wars. He was very much opposed to any foreign wars, and that resonated. And it especially resonated with this group I keep calling the undervote. That is, those people who hate Democrats and they hate Republicans. They do not have any party loyalty whatsoever, and so they're not just going to vote for any Republican candidate. They're only going to vote for Trump. And I know some people out there aren't going to like to hear this, but this is a fact. The research in The Great Revolt by Selena Zito confirmed this, that many of these people they never voted before and they aren't going to vote again. Some of them did vote for Obama, thinking that this was a chance for a change in 2008, and didn't vote for him again in 2012. And you look at 2012 and the numbers of Republican votes for Minion Romney plummeted. Obama was there for the beating. You know, you could have beaten him with a stronger candidate, but Romney wasn't it because he was too much viewed as the insider GOP-y candidate. So it turns out, according to Barnes' sources, that in fact DeSantis had this meeting that was public with Paul Ryan, and with Karl Rove. I haven't yet come up with a nickname. I keep hoping he'll be irrelevant, so I won't have to, but maybe I'll have to. But that DeSantis met a few weeks ago with Paul Ryan and RuPaul and some of the tops at Faux News, right? And they convinced him that Trump was going to be indicted and that he couldn't run a campaign if he was indicted, and therefore the door was open for DeSantis to run. Now, prior to that, DeSantis was leaning toward being a Trump Veep and then running in 24. But these guys apparently convinced him to run now because Trump was going to be taken out, to use a phrase. And so far that hasn't happened. It may still happen. They may indict him next week. Who knows? But this was what prompted DeSantis to go hot and heavy into the campaign. Up to that point, he had very carefully stayed away from anything and just let his surrogates go out and make various comments. And I'm not, look, folks, I'm not criticizing this. This is politics. This happens on all sides. I want to remind you guys of how nasty and dirty the 2016 Republican campaign was between especially Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. They were going after each other's wives and they were calling each other names. And you might remember how this ended. Was that after Trump got the nomination, Cruz was invited to speak to the Republican National Convention, and he blew it. I mean, he stepped in it big time, and he made all these kind of nasty comments, and and didn't say anything about endorsing Trump and was booed. You don't get booed too often at a Republican National Convention unless you're Cankles. So it was a big mistake what Cruz did. And just me, this is my opinion, I'm seeing overtones of DeSantis stepping in it the same way Cruz did. He's not going to beat Trump in a primary. Indeed, over the last 4 weeks, in most polls, the latest one being Morning Consult and Monmouth, Trump's margin over DeSantis has increased, and in some polls increased dramatically. He's up to 20 points in some polls, 30-point leads in other polls. This is just in my view, again, others have other views, this is a horrible political mistake by DeSantis. It's just a screw-up of mammoth proportions. And mostly I'm talking about his statement that he put out attacking Alvin Bragg, the DA of the Manhattan district that was launching this so-called indictment of Trump. And the reason that was such a bad mistake, in my view, is that DeSantis tackled Bragg, but he dodged tackling the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that they are after Trump and nobody else. Now, obviously, that tells you something. It tells you they think they can take out anybody else, including DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Vivek whatever his name is, that they can take these guys out easy. They aren't wasting any resources on them whatsoever because they are not a threat. So, to me, the super error, the colossal error that DeSantis made was, number one, in not recognizing or stating that there was a deep state effort to take out Trump, which there obviously is. That's what this is all about. It's not just a rogue DA in Manhattan who's weaponizing the DA's office. Yes, that's true, but that's like a crocodile's coming up to you, and your response is, oh, the crocodile has a long tail. Yeah, that's true, and that's also mostly irrelevant for what's about to happen and for what the setting was. So, in my view, DeSantis could have said this attack on President Trump is unprecedented and evil and is representative of the threat posed by the deep state. And that would have been sufficient, but he didn't do that. And then he went on to add that ridiculous little jab about, oh, I don't know what is entailed in making payoffs to porn stars or bribes, whatever he said, which was, it's politics, I get it. He's getting his dig in, but that was really, really dumb. And so I think DeSantis has permanently crippled his political career here, unless, in fact, something does completely take out Trump, like he's put in jail and can't campaign. So anyway, Barnes went on to mention that his inside sources had told him that DeSantis knew about the Mar-a-Lago raid well in advance. Now, why is that important? He couldn't do anything to stop it. I'm not suggesting he could. But he could have at least issued a statement as governor of Florida. This is occurring on Florida territory. It's outrageous. It's wrong. It should never be happening. I thoroughly oppose this. I have no power to stop it, but I register a formal complaint. You know, Demi Moore in A Few Good Men. I strenuously object, right? You got to at least strenuously object once in a while. And so, in my estimation, DeSantis maybe mortally wounded himself this week. And I think, reading between the lines, you can see this again in the Twitter comments by the DeSantisoids, who are just coming out of the woodwork to try and defend. Well, when they got to defend him like that, you know he stepped in it pretty good. So we'll see what happens with this and where this continues to lead. But as I said, no indictment today. Now, second big story here is the banking crisis. My background, as you may know, my PhD, is in history, but it's specifically in economic history, and it's more specifically in banking and financial history. my doctoral dissertation was a history of banking in the American South from the age of Jackson to Reconstruction. And then I followed that up with a book on banking in the American West. I edited a couple of volumes on the Encyclopedia of American Business History on banking and finance. The most cited thing I've ever written is a paper with a friend and a true genius, Charles Calamiris of Columbia University, and who served briefly in Trump's office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And that paper was on the banking repercussions of the Dred Scott decision, where he and I showed that the Dred Scott decision caused the Panic of 1857. So I'm no economist. I don't pretend to be. I get lost with ISLM curves, but I do know a little bit about banking history. And did you know in the 1920s, the roaring 20s, the good times, before the Great Depression, did you know that we were losing thousands of banks a year, most of them in the farm sector, most of them in the agricultural sector, where these banks were very small, some of them with capitalizations of $5,000. I mean, you or I could go out and be a bank today, right? But obviously they were very fragile if any economic conditions went haywire. So bank failures are nothing new. They are nothing to get hysterical about. Silicon Valley Bank was pretty big, but compared to Chase and you know, Citibank and some of these other giant banks, it's Wachovia, it's nothing. Credit Suisse did not get a bailout; they got a buyout, and so they are gone. But their problem is contained for the time being. Right now, we're all kind of watching First Republic Bank and whether or not that's going to fold. It looks like the Fed is stepping in to try to buttress that and bail that out. So there's an interesting case being made. I haven't researched it fully, that what we are seeing right now is actually a deflation of sorts, of asset deflation, whether it's homes or other capital investments. We're seeing price inflation with goods and services. And so the Fed has a problem. They can't tighten the money supply too much without causing credit problems and causing bank failure problems and things like that. So the Fed is trying to tightrope this between keeping inflation down a little bit and gradually causing it to tick down. Of course, we know that the driver of inflation is federal government printing money, right? And they're not going to do anything about that in the near future. But let me just kind of cut to the chase and say, I don't think right now we're facing a bank contagion. I don't see people lining up at local banks. I don't see panic setting in. I don't see Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Citibank or Chase or Midland or BCC, what is it, BCC or PNC or Wachovia or any of these big bank chains experiencing any real difficulty now. Now, the critics will say, well, they didn't do that either until Lehman Brothers fell. The fundamentals are much, much different right now. The problems that the banks are facing right now is that they're dealing with inflation and having to pay out more to get any kind of deposits at all, while once again they're dealing with now housing mortgages, that housing sales are starting to tail off pretty bad, and housing prices are falling. So we'll keep our eye on it. I don't see any real contagion happening, but you do want to watch it. Personally, I'm not going to run down this morning and get my money out of my credit union, but I won't tell you that I wouldn't do that if I thought the situation was changing. All right. There is a very big election going on today in the state of Wisconsin. If you're in Wisconsin, you need to go vote for the Republican for the Supreme Court. It's a one vote, one seat difference up there. It's a very important election that we need to hold that Supreme Court, especially coming up with 2024. It was every bit as important as the governor's race up there that we lost. So take a look at that. Other than that, we are still dealing with all the uncertainties of the rutabaga, easily the worst president in American history. Nobody else even comes close. And it's an astounding mixture of incompetence and evil and demonic activity that we've just never even seen before. I mean, we've had administrations that were incompetent. We've had administrations that were evil and bad, but we've never seen this combination of incompetence and evil. I guess part of the good news is that they are so incompetent they can't even do evil right sometimes, but it's a pretty bad situation out there. Let me see. Is there anything else we need to discuss before I sign off here? I'm trying to think. I am, of course, traveling. I'll be here Friday, but I won't be here next Friday because I'll be in Greenville at the Great Homeschool Convention. Oh, this is what I want to talk about. There's a number of papers that have come out this week on education. And New York State has announced that they're lowering their test standards because nobody can pass their tests, right? This is the epitome of imbecility, that because nobody can pass your test, the problem is the test. It's not that the people don't know anything. And we've already seen that in certain parts of Baltimore, no student can read or do math at grade level. And we're increasingly seeing these stories come out. In Illinois, 60 schools reported that no student could read or do math at grade level. And we're literally turning out a generation of dumbkins, people who can't, clip their fingernails, let alone change a tire, let alone do higher math. And this is a very serious problem. Now, I saw a study yesterday that I'm including in my update to Patriot's History of the United States that I will put on the web here when it's done, probably within a couple of months. And this study showed that over the last 50 years, the gap between income levels and education levels hasn't changed at all, despite all the Head Start programs and all these efforts at trying to improve the socioeconomic conditions of people at the lower level. It hasn't mattered one iota. And that's really the definition of insanity, is to continue doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. They're not getting any results here. And of course, need I say, it's not being helped by the woke revolution here that is putting all these alphabet agencies in place everywhere and imposing that on the education system. I just returned from a homeschool convention, and last year it was down from the previous non-COVID year a little bit. This year they were full of vendors. They couldn't take any more vendors. That was the level of interest in homeschooling. My last numbers were that there are about 10 to 20 million homeschool students. Now that depends on how you count them. One, using a very strict counting of those who don't attend public school in any way, shape, or form, is about 10 million. I think that comes out to about 10% of America's students. But a broader definition that is held by the guy who heads one of these other conventions is that if you look at all those homeschool students who have to attend a public school for sports or for art or music or some other ancillary program other than pure academics, the public schools count them as full-time students. But if you correctly count them as homeschoolers, the numbers of homeschoolers may be in the neighborhood of 20 million, which might put them closer to about 20% of U.S. Student body population, which is pretty impressive. Then you take out all those who are in private schools and charter schools, Bottom line is, I think we are succeeding in our goal of winnowing away the public schools. We've got to get rid of these archaic and fundamentally flawed institutions. There needs to be some sort of public education establishment for those who absolutely have no other access to education anywhere else. But other than that, everybody else should be moved off to homeschool or charter school or private school. But let me return to this New York test score story for just one moment. It does present a real problem. So you've got a 16-year-old who can't pass the tests. Going to be 17 next year, is a senior, needs to graduate, but can't pass the test. What do? Do you hold them back another year? What if they don't pass the test the next year? How long do you hold them back till legally they're an adult and you have to kick them out? Do you want 17 and 18-year-olds in with 13, 14, 15-year-olds? And moreover, what does that do to class sizes? If you keep holding people back, I'm not saying you should pass them because they can't do the test, but I'm just asking the question, what do you do with them? Because you eventually have this almost penitentiary system because they're not cutting the mustard and don't want to cut the mustard. It's a very serious question, and I don't know where we go from there, but you know, we need to keep an eye on this because the education system in this country, from top to bottom, universities, just totally falling apart. And I would like to see the colleges kind of eliminated and replaced with true institutions of learning. One thing, of course, that's keeping them going, you all know this, is the sports programs in the big schools. If they didn't have that sports money coming in, they would be forced to make some much tougher choices. I had a story earlier, maybe 2 weeks ago, about the Modern Language Association and how English classes are disappearing in universities, and entire departments are disappearing. History departments are shrinking. They're not being used anymore. Of course, engineering, science, business, law, those are growing. But what do you do with these universities that no longer are fulfilling the goal and mission of a liberal arts college, to teach people liberal arts, to give people a full grounding in geography and history and the English language and classical studies and a foreign language, all these kinds of things to make what we used to call a well-rounded student that I think is absolutely necessary. I don't diminish that at all. I just think our current universities and colleges aren't even beginning to meet that need anymore. All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up. You can always send me a question at Larry@WildWorldOfHistory. I don't have the chat going yet. I will get the chat going sometime as soon as I'm very comfortable with all this stuff. I would like to move this show over to locals when we can, but right now, I guess I didn't buy a good enough plan or whatnot. I've got to figure out what's going on. We can't do any more local shows for a while. Larry Schweikart Live there. So we'll just keep doing this. But of course, I have to watch what I say a little bit more here on YouTube. This is brought to you by the Wild World of History. Go check out wildworldofhistory.com for full lessons in U.S. and world history. For the VIP, you'll want all these lessons. These are, I have up now 4 ongoing lesson programs with almost 40 videos. Reagan, the American president, the 1620 default, why the 1619 project is wrong, enduring lessons on life and citizenship. These are great for kids. I ask questions like, what's the relationship between time and money? Or ones on communism and capitalism, taught in a way I guarantee you've never heard it taught before. So check those out. It's only $6 a month for a subscription at the VIP at the Wild World History. And if you like what you've seen, there's a link around here someplace to buy Larry a coffee. I'll take all the coffee I can drink. All right, guys, thanks, and I will see you guys back here on Friday here at the Wild World of History channel, Patriot Plus.